Ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and while I've never thought I would be finding myself here talking about Starfield once more, there are always these moments where I find myself so vehemently opposed to something that I just can't simply dismiss it, and that is where I found myself these past couple of days as I considered the words of Bruce Nesmith, who was the systems designer for Starfield until his departure roughly a year before Starfield's release. Now, I've shared my opinion regarding Starfield numerous times in the past, both in video and on social media. Starfield is bland, it is boring, it is small patches of sameness interspersed with vast swaths of procedurally generated emptiness. It is replete with loading screens, an overall plot that boils down to New Game Plus being used as a story device while adding nothing whatsoever to the additional playthroughs, and its characters it uses to push the plot forward are the most one-dimensional and uninteresting I have seen used in a story-driven game that I can remember. Suffice it to say, I'm most certainly not a fan of Starfield, but something I'm even less of a fan of is when game developers continue to come up with self-delusions and lies to attempt to shield themselves from the outcomes of their own incompetence and attempting to perpetuate those notions on gamers. The equivalent of handing someone a turd sandwich and calling it ambrosia. And in a recent interview with Bruce Nesmith by FRVR, an interview that has been latched onto by numerous other legacy media sites, Bruce Nesmith had a few things to say. And chief among them is where he said, "I'm an enormous space fan. I'm an amateur astronomer. I'm up on all the stuff. A lot of the work I did on Starfield was on the astronomical data. But space is inherently boring. It's literally described as nothingness. So moving throughout that isn't where the excitement is, in my opinion." Which is fair to a certain extent. Although this is Nesmith somewhat breaking from the narrative Bethesda has already attempted to push for over 2 years. Back in September of 2023, Todd Howard and Ashley Cheng, Bethesda's managing director, said in a New York Times interview per PC Gamer, "The point of the vastness of space is you should feel small," Cheng told the New York Times. "It should feel overwhelming," addressing fans' worries that Starfield's 1,000 planets are going to be boring. Cheng pointed out that not every planet is supposed to be Disney World. When the astronauts went to the moon, there was nothing there. They certainly weren't bored. But in both of these statements, both Cheng and Nesmith, along with Todd Howard, fail at basic comprehension as to what makes a good space game. Now, space in and of itself can be said to be boring. This is true. However, space in entertainment has been very far from it in the past, and we have innumerable examples of such. In movies and television, we have Star Trek, Star Wars, Alien, Babylon 5, Battlestar Galactica, Stargate, and The Expanse, to name but a few. In video games, we have Mass Effect, MechWarrior, Star Trek and Star Wars again, Alien again, StarCraft, Warhammer 40k, Wing Commander. Those are a small fraction of space games that have existed over the decades. Space in film, in television, in books, and in games have captured the imagination and invigorated the spirit for generations. Space as a genre has been used as a vehicle for suspense, horror, action, drama, and a way to explore the human condition, a way to question not only the world around us, but as a vehicle for introspection.
You judge yourselves against the pitiful adversaries you've encountered so far. The Romulans, the Klingons. They're nothing compared to what's waiting. Picard. You are about to move into areas of the galaxy containing wonders more incredible than you can possibly imagine, and terrors to freeze your soul.
But at the end of the day, space as a concept is nothing more than a blank canvas. The same as anything else in many respects, but it brings with it the wonder of the unknown and the excitement of limitless possibility that exists within it. That self-same wonder that many people get as they lay back on the grass and stare up at the night sky. But for all that wonder, all that possibility, empty space is still empty. This is true. A blank canvas waiting to be filled. And this is one of the preeminent failures of a game like Starfield. Any critic or any writer worth their salt will be able to tell you that world building starts with that blank canvas, but it rarely ever ends there. Much like Bob Ross starting with the sky, then the mountains, then the land and the grass and the happy little trees, world building is a process. Granted, when you're building your world and you want it to contain vast stretches of either nothingness or procedurally generated sameness, that is all well and good, but those game developers need to keep in mind that this is still a game. And find me a person who sits and wonders at the realms of limitless possibility and potential within procedural generation, and you'll find no one besides a lazy game developer. You can have stretches of nothing. That's fine. But the game itself must be interspersed with something. And that something needs to at least be interesting. When you take out all of the long travels going from place to place that contain basically nothing at all, you're left with the core concepts of the game. Its story, its characters, and its mechanics. Take each of those and picture them as rooms right next to each other with doors linking each of them together. Because in reality, that is what they are, and that is more readily apparent to the player because of the rampant loading screens that plague Starfield because of the way it was designed and the engine it was designed in. And when you look at each of these elements on their own, they're not good. The game mechanics are not well done. The combat is poor, ship design and ship combat are mediocre at best, the story is abysmal, and the characters driving the story, well, those are even worse. Now you take each of those rooms that were right next to each other and you pull the rooms apart, placing each one hundreds of yards away from each other and connect them with long open corridors filled with doors you have to open and go through just to get from one room to the next and back again. And the vast majority of the time you see little to nothing above you in those open air corridors. What you're doing then is taking something that is already a chore for people to accomplish and make them wade through long spaces of boredom just to be able to continue with the blandness that is contained within those rooms. Now, if you want people to have a sense of wonder within your space game, they need whatever is in those rooms to be good, but they also need the views along the way to be beautiful. Staring at empty space in a video game is always going to be different than staring up at the night sky with all of those twinkling lights of possibility. That is simply the nature of reality, because when we see those stars in real life, we see the unknown. When we see those lights of distant stars in a video game, we know what is there. It is a backdrop, a set piece, and that major difference seems lost on Todd Howard and the developers at Bethesda. Now, even in games like Mass Effect Andromeda, a game that was terrible, it still had moments of beauty within it because of the area backdrops created by the background artists. And those backgrounds in some areas were breathtaking to behold, and those managed to still instill a sense of wonder, even in a game that I didn't at all care for. Whether it be a shattered world, asteroids on fire as they entered an atmosphere, a nebula, or something else along those lines, adding in such backdrops helped to capture the wonder of the vastness of space, because it's not the emptiness that entices, it is the things that exist to fill the emptiness. And game developers need to wake up and to learn that their gaslighting gamers is not going to work when it comes to topics such as these. Starfield was not designed at all well, and the sooner the Bethesda developers come to recognize that, the sooner they might be able to come up with a game that is actually good. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and I'll see you next time.